Um, the other thing, in addition to the legal layer, we have a technical layer. And so this is metadata. And this is another massive project that after 4 or 5 years we've gotten to a very important point, which is we have convinced the World Wide Web Consortium to make as an official recommendation our protocol that we've created called RDFA, which basically allows inside of HTML for you to mark up a piece of content with all the copyright information. So this image or this piece of music is owned by this person, is a derivative of this. For non-commercial use, it's this license. For commercial use, go here for the license, and all the kind of copyright information you might imagine you can embed inside of the HTML. And each object on the page can have different copyright information, and if you copy and paste it into some Adobe thing in the future, it should drag all the copyright information with it, including who to pay and all that kind of stuff. And Yahoo, Google, and Microsoft all recognize it now. And Google, who used to hate metadata and just thought it was spam, they've started to actually read the metadata and express it. So this has been a lot of our energy has been to try to get all the platforms, including the software vendors, to start recognizing this. So in the future, what hopefully will happen is that when you edit videos or do music and things like that, without any effort, the copyright information and the ownership and the attribution will all come along, and it will be very easy to put the credits in and so on. And this should also help in doing things like clearing rights. And one possible thing could be that your little movie editor, you could eventually hopefully do click to buy, and that automatically clears the rights and pays the right people for whatever use you want to do. I mean, that kind of thing is the application that can happen, and the technical stuff that we're doing. And while we did this mainly so that we can do Creative Commons, we've done this in a very general way. So even if you're not using Creative Commons, even if you're just trying to license all rights reserved stuff, you can use all of the technical tools that the framework that we've created. And you can't imagine how difficult it is to convince the W3C to do anything. And so I think that we've sort of paved the way. And this is one of our sort of olive branches to some of the more restrictive copyright people, is that we've basically made the internet more friendly to copyright. And so again, I get upset when people say that we're anti-copyright, because we're probably more pro-copyright than anybody. It's just that we feel like we want to allow people to use copyright more easily.
That would have been my question, yeah? So is this kind of in competition to traditional copyright as we had it for a couple of hundred years?
No, I mean, so the political position of Creative Commons and the position of some of our members is slightly maybe different. I mean, Creative Commons is not a lobbying organization. We're a charity, so we don't lobby to change the law, even though some of us think the law could be changed. So what we do is we push for very strict adherence to copyright law, and we're creating kind of a hack, but a way to use copyright law to make it easier to do what you want to do, but follow the law. So we're about how can you follow the law and use technology to make it easier for users to follow the law, but to then prove certain business models that would benefit from a less restrictive copyright regime. But the fact is that we're against piracy. We're against what we call abolitionists, who say we don't want any copyright. I mean, we only exist because copyright exists. I think there are certain board members that would like the copyright law to be changed in various ways, but Creative Commons is not. Creative Commons is just, copyright is a complicated international thing that the average artist is not going to have the money to hire the lawyers to figure out how to express what they want the way they want. So we're creating a tool that allows you to make a choice and express it legally and technically in a way that's interoperable with everybody else in the rest of the world. And interoperability is very important. So for example, Wikipedia had a different license called GFDL, and it's very similar to a Creative Commons share-alike license, but it's slightly different. And so for years, you couldn't remix student courseware under Creative Commons with Wikipedia content, because even though they're different, they had to be shared back to their own licenses, so it was like the internet except two. So the problem is, having multiple licenses that say similar things is very, very different than having everybody use the same license. That's why we have to be somewhat imperialistic. It's like the internet's useful because it's one network. If everybody used a different version of TCP/IP, it wouldn't work. And so just every label having their own version of free, or BBC having the Creative Archives, and that, it still requires a lawyer to read each one, and also, even if they read it, sometimes it's not compatible. So this is actually a technical standards problem, and not really just a movement to try to make everything more open. It's a little bit more than that.
So if we're coming from a background where record labels have traditionally always paid, to do contracts with management or with artists and stuff like that. If you're a record label today, you've got maybe 5 artists, a number of releases, they're on tour. Like, what's the one or a couple of the best ways for a label to start using Creative Commons?
Right.
Or is it again a system because the music industry is using this Creative Commons just kind of rubbing against it and not talking?
So the music examples would be, so for the very established artist who has no more untapped demand, and all they have is just selling something that is already in high demand, Creative Commons is probably not that useful. Unless they want to allow fans to create derivatives and they want to lengthen sale by there are various marketing techniques that might be useful. Creative Commons is probably more useful for the artists who would like to use MySpace and file sharing networks to promote their music, but still want to get paid for commercial broadcast, or for or prevent exploitation of their works in movies or CDs and stuff like that. So right now, Coda, Booma, so in Sweden, Denmark, and in Holland, we have deals with rights collection societies, so that an artist that uses Creative Commons non-commercial can allow their fans to share their music for non-commercial use, but the collection society still collects from their traditional commercial users. And so you can coexist in those 3 societies. Other people we're in talks in France and Italy and Australia about sort of coexistence.
Now tell us a bit about what's the problem. If I'm in Germany right now, it's difficult for me to be part of GEMA and release my stuff.
It's forbidden.
It's even forbidden. What can you?
It's forbidden because. Well, let's see. It depends on how cynical I want to be. It's a pain in the ass for them because they have a very specific model, and everybody uses the same contract, and they scale and they do it effectively because everybody's signed the same contract. They have the rights and they can go in. Now, the tricky part is if somebody uses Creative Commons license and they say, hey, well, we're non-commercial and this is a non-commercial license, you can't, and I'm only playing non-commercial music, you can't collect for me and stuff like that. And so suddenly their job becomes very complicated. In the case of Coda and Boom and those guys, they have a side letter with the artist that has a more narrow definition of non-commercial than our license, so it's a little bit of a kludge. And it could be contested, so like this bar could say, well, we don't agree. This is under a Creative Commons license and we don't make any money and we're going to fight you. And no one's done that, but that's a risk. But it's a whole new thing that they don't like. So the places that have started it have just been because a lot of artists have gotten up and said, we want to use a Creative Commons non-commercial license. And the voice of those artists have been well heard. In jurisdictions where the collection society boards are more sort of influenced by the older artists who don't really want to experiment, they tend to be a little bit more conservative.